The phone trembled in her hand at exactly 11:47 p.m., its cracked screen glowing like a warning light in the dark apartment. And in that second, she realized two terrible things at once. The baby formula was completely gone, and the message she had just sent could not be taken back. Outside the thin window, fireworks from someone else's celebration burst across the sky in careless colors, while inside, a hungry infant whimpered against her chest and a single mother felt the floor of her life give way beneath her. She did not yet know that this mistake, this desperate, humiliating reach for $50, would redraw the map of her future before the night was over. Before the story pulls you deeper, take a moment. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and the idea that one small act can change a life, please like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. Stories like this matter because people like this exist. Fuck. Her name was Clara Whitmore, though no one in the city cared enough to remember it. She lived on the edge of a downtown neighborhood that had once promised renewal and delivered only higher rents and quieter streets. The apartment was barely more than 2 rooms stitched together with peeling paint and memories of better days. The heater had stopped working weeks earlier, and she had learned to dress her baby in layers instead of fixing what she could not afford. Every surface told the story of a life in retreat. Unopened mail stacked on the counter, a resume printed too many times to count, baby bottles drying on a towel because the rack had broken. Clara had once imagined a different life, one filled with stability and shared laughter. But imagination had proven to be a luxury she could no longer afford. Motherhood had arrived in her life like a storm with no forecast. The father of her child had left before the first ultrasound photo faded from the fridge, promising support that never came and answers that never followed. Clara had worked 2 part-time jobs until her body could no longer manage the hours, until daycare costs swallowed entire paychecks and forced her into the impossible math of survival. She learned quickly that love alone did not fill bottles, that resilience did not replace rent, and that pride could be a dangerous thing when a baby cried from hunger. Still, she held on to it, threadbare as it was, because it was the last thing that felt like hers. That night, the baby, Evan, had been fussier than usual. Clara paced the room, rocking him gently, whispering promises she was no longer sure she could keep. She checked the cabinet one last time, though she already knew what she would find. An empty formula tin stared back at her like an accusation. Her stomach tightened and the room felt smaller, the silence louder. She had stretched the last scoop hours earlier, hoping it would be enough to get them through the night. It had not been. Clara sat on the edge of the couch, her phone heavy in her hand, and scrolled through her contacts with shaking fingers. Each name carried a memory and a reason not to ask. Friends who were barely keeping themselves afloat. Family members who had already given too much or too little. Numbers she had deleted out of shame and re-added out of habit. She landed on one contact labeled simply a Mark. He was a former co-worker from years ago, someone kind but distant, someone who had once said to reach out if she ever needed help. She had not spoken to him in over a year, but desperation has a way of shrinking time and erasing boundaries. She typed the message slowly, carefully, her pride fighting her survival instinct at every word. She explained just enough. She asked for just $50. She promised to pay it back. She read it over twice, then a third time, and pressed send before she could change her mind. The message left her phone, and she exhaled as if she had been holding her breath for months. What Clara did not know, what she could not have known, was that the contact she had selected was not Mark, the former co-worker. It was Marcus Hale, the billionaire CEO whose number she had saved weeks earlier by accident after a job interview assistant forwarded the wrong contact card. Fur. She had never used it, never noticed the difference, never imagined that the quiet rectangle in her hand now carried her plea into a world of private jets, guarded penthouses, and balance sheets measured in billions. Marcus Hale was sitting alone in his glass-walled penthouse when the message arrived. The city sprawled beneath him like a constellation of ambitions, fireworks still flaring from rooftop parties he had declined. He wore an expensive suit he had not bothered to change out of, a half-full glass of champagne untouched at his side. Success had wrapped itself around his life so tightly that it had squeezed out almost everything else. He was a man accustomed to requests, investors, charities, politicians, But this message stopped him cold. The text was simple, unpolished, and painfully human. $50, baby formula. An apology embedded between the lines. It was not the sum that unsettled him. It was the honesty, the rawness, the unmistakable tone of someone standing at the edge of a cliff, hoping the ground might still appear beneath their feet. Marcus reread the message, checking the number, assuming it was a scam. But something about it refused to fit the pattern. There was no link, no pitch, no manipulation. Just need. Marcus had grown up with nothing. Before the headlines in boardrooms, there had been foster homes, food stamps, and nights when hunger felt like a permanent condition. He had learned early how invisible people could become when they needed help the most. His fortune had been built on intelligence and relentless work, but it had also been fueled by a promise he had made to himself long ago that if he ever escaped, he would not forget what it felt like to be trapped. He could have wired $1,000 with a tap and moved on. He could have ignored the message entirely. Instead, something in him shifted. He replied briefly, asking for the address, then stood up before his assistant could intercept him or his rational mind could talk him out of it. He grabbed his coat, left the champagne untouched, and told no one where he was going. Back in the apartment, Clara stared at her phone in disbelief when a reply appeared almost immediately. Her heart pounded as she read it, confusion washing over her. The name at the top of the screen was wrong. Terribly wrong. Her stomach dropped as recognition set in, and panic followed close behind. She had messaged the wrong person, someone powerful, someone she had no right to bother. Shame burned through her chest, and she typed out a frantic apology explaining the mistake, promising to leave him alone. Before she could send it, another message arrived. A simple acknowledgement, a request for her address. Clara froze. Her mind raced through possibilities, most of them humiliating or frightening. She considered ignoring it, blocking the number, pretending none of this had happened. Evan cried softly against her shoulder, grounding her in the present, reminding her why she had taken this risk in the first place. With trembling hands, she sent the address, her heart beating so loudly she was sure the neighbors could hear it. The next 15 minutes stretched into something unreal. Clara paced the apartment, checking the window, checking the door, checking her phone. She berated herself for her carelessness, for her hope. She imagined being laughed at, scolded, or worse. The baby's cries grew louder, and she felt the familiar ache of helplessness settle into her bones. At exactly midnight, there was a knock on the door. It was not loud or demanding. Just a steady, unmistakable sound that cut through the apartment like a line drawn in ink. Clara's breath caught. No one ever came by unannounced. She adjusted Evan in her arms, moved quietly toward the door, and peered through the peephole. Shh. The hallway light framed a man in a dark coat, his posture calm, his expression serious but not unkind. He looked impossibly out of place in the dim corridor, like a figure from another world who had taken a wrong turn. Clara recognized him instantly, though she had only ever seen his face on magazine covers and news articles. Marcus Hale standing outside her door, holding a small paper bag. Her knees nearly gave out. She opened the door slowly, unsure whether to apologize, explain, or cry. Marcus spoke first, his voice low and steady, apologizing for arriving so late, explaining that he wanted to make sure she had what she needed immediately. He handed her the bag, and she saw the familiar branding of a pharmacy printed on the side. Formula, diapers. A few other essentials she had not even thought to ask for. Clara's vision blurred as the weight of the moment hit her. She had expected judgment or distance or charity delivered from afar. She had not expected presence. She thanked him repeatedly, the words tumbling over each other, her voice breaking despite her efforts to stay composed. Marcus listened without interrupting, his attention focused not on the spectacle of her gratitude but on the baby in her arms, whose cries softened as if sensing a shift in the room. Marcus did not stay long. He did not ask invasive questions or offer grand promises. He simply made sure the formula was prepared correctly, waited until Evan fed, and confirmed that Clara would be okay for the night. Before leaving, he told her that mistakes sometimes found the right people, and that she did not need to carry her burdens alone. Then he stepped back into the hallway, disappearing as quietly as he had arrived. When the door closed, Clara sank onto the couch, clutching her sleeping baby in the paper bag that felt heavier than gold. She did not cry right away. She sat in silence, letting the reality of what had just happened settle into her bones. For the first time in months, the tight knot in her chest loosened just enough for her to breathe. That night marked the beginning of something Clara could not yet name. In the days that followed, Marcus checked in occasionally, always respectful, always brief. He helped her navigate assistance programs she had been denied before, connected her with a child care option that made returning to work possible, and offered mentorship that went far beyond financial support. He never framed it as rescue. He framed it as recognition. Clara returned to work, first tentatively, then with growing confidence. She found a position that valued her skills rather than her circumstances. She moved out of the cramped apartment into a small but warm place where the heater worked and the windows let in light instead of drafts. Evan grew stronger, his laughter filling rooms that had once echoed with fear. Marcus, for his part, found himself changed by the experience. The encounter reminded him of the promises he had made to himself long ago, of the people he had once been, and of the ways success could isolate as much as it elevated. He began investing time and resources into programs that addressed the quiet emergencies no one liked to talk about, the $50 crises that determined whether a night ended in despair or hope. Their lives intersected occasionally, not as benefactor and recipient, but as two people who had seen each other at vulnerable crossroads. They shared meals, conversations about loss and resilience, and a mutual respect that grew slowly, organically. There was no rush, no fairy tale declarations, just the steady unfolding of trust. Years later, Clara would look back on that night as the moment her story pivoted. Not because a billionaire had shown up at her door, but because someone had seen her need and responded with humanity instead of distance. She would teach Evan that asking for help was not weakness, that mistakes could be doorways, and that kindness often arrived when least expected. As the story draws to a close, if this moment, this reminder of how small acts can ripple outward, has touched your heart, please take a second to like the video, share it, and subscribe. Your engagement helps stories like this reach the people who need them most. And before the final fade, leave a comment below telling us where you believe kindness shows up in the world today. Your words might be the light someone else is waiting for. Because sometimes all it takes to change a life is $50, a wrong number, and the courage to answer a knock at midnight. The weeks after that midnight knock did not arrive with fireworks or sudden miracles, but with something far more unsettling. For Clara Whitmore, quiet stability. It felt unnatural at first, like standing on solid ground after years at sea and waiting for the deck to tilt again. Each morning she woke expecting the familiar dread, the calculation of hours, diapers, dollars, but instead there was a strange pause, a moment where panic didn't immediately rush in. That pause alone felt dangerous because hope had betrayed her before. Still, she moved carefully into it, one small step at a time, holding Evan close as if the world might still decide to take something back. Marcus Hale did not become a constant presence in her life, and that was perhaps the greatest gift he gave her. He never hovered, never made her feel like a project or a headline waiting to be written. He checked in just enough to make sure the bridge he had extended was sturdy, not something she would be forced to cross alone in the dark. When he sent information about child care assistance or job leads, it came without pressure. When he offered help, it came with an exit, a way for her to say no without consequences. For someone who had spent months feeling trapped by every option, that freedom mattered more than money ever could. Clara's return to work was not triumphant. It was awkward and exhausting and threaded with guilt. The first morning she left Evan at a subsidized child care center recommended by one of Marcus's contacts, she cried the entire bus ride downtown. She worried he would forget her face, that she was choosing ambition over motherhood, survival over love. But when she picked him up that afternoon, and he smiled, reaching for her with unfiltered joy, something inside her loosened. She realized that providing for him was not abandonment. It was devotion in a different language. The job itself was modest, an administrative role at a mid-sized logistics company that valued reliability over pedigree. Clara threw herself into it with the intensity of someone who knew what it cost to lose an opportunity. She arrived early, stayed late when she could, and absorbed every system, every unspoken rule. Her supervisors noticed not just her work ethic, but her calm under pressure, the way she solved problems quietly instead of escalating them. It reminded her of who she had been before motherhood narrowed her world: capable, sharp, dependable. At night, when Evan slept and the apartment hummed softly around them, Clara allowed herself to think about the future again. Not in grand terms, but in increments. A better couch. A savings account that didn't empty itself every month. A birthday party where she didn't count the slices of cake. She still felt the weight of her past pressing at her back, but it no longer pinned her in place. Marcus, meanwhile, found himself returning to old memories he had sealed away with success. Clara's apartment, with its thin walls and flickering lights, had looked too much like places he had lived in once. He remembered the way hunger sharpened every emotion, how desperation could make even asking for help feel like an act of violence against your own dignity. Seeing Clara navigate that space with grace unsettled him in ways boardroom conflicts never had. It reminded him that his wealth insulated him not just from hardship, but from understanding how close so many people lived to the edge. He began to look differently at the city beneath his penthouse windows. The lights no longer represented achievement alone, but stories unfolding in parallel, millions of lives moving quietly through crises no one celebrated surviving. Marcus started reallocating resources, funding small-scale emergency grants that addressed immediate needs rather than long-term optics. He insisted on anonymity, not out of modesty, but because he wanted recipients to feel supported, not scrutinized. He knew too well how charity could sometimes feel like surveillance. Clara did not know the extent of these changes, and Marcus never mentioned them. Their conversations, when they happened, were about ordinary things. Evan's first laugh, a book Marcus had recently finished. A problem at work Clara couldn't quite untangle. They met occasionally for coffee in neutral spaces where neither of them felt out of place. The imbalance between their lives was undeniable, but it did not define their interactions. What bound them was not money, but recognition, the sense that each had seen the other without illusion. Time passed, and with it came complications. Clara's confidence grew, but so did her awareness of how easily it could all unravel. One unexpected expense, one illness, one lost paycheck could send her back to the beginning. She began to save aggressively, refusing small comforts in favor of security. The discipline brought its own tension. She caught herself flinching at joy, afraid it might demand payment later. Marcus noticed this shift, the way she measured happiness, and understood it intimately. Their relationship deepened slowly, without labels. There were moments of warmth that surprised them both, a shared laugh that lingered too long, a silence that felt companionable instead of awkward. Clara struggled with the idea of wanting more. She had rebuilt her life on the premise of independence, and the thought of leaning on anyone, especially someone as powerful as Marcus, frightened her. She worried about the narrative others would impose, about being reduced to a stereotype she had worked so hard to escape. Marcus, for his part, wrestled with restraint. He was accustomed to clarity, to deals defined by terms and outcomes. What he felt for Clara did not fit into any structure he recognized. It was not possessive or urgent, but it was persistent. He admired her resilience, her intelligence, the way she loved her child without sacrificing herself entirely. He also knew the danger of his position. Any step he took carried weight, consequences she might feel, even if she did not ask for them. The turning point came quietly, as most real ones do. Evan fell ill one winter night, a fever that spiked too quickly and refused to come down. Clara rushed him to the emergency room, fear erasing every rational thought. She sat alone in the waiting area, watching other families pace and whisper, her phone clenched in her hand. She debated calling Marcus, then scolded herself for the impulse. This was her responsibility, her life. But when the doctor finally assured her Evan would be fine, that the illness was serious but manageable, the adrenaline drained out of her all at once. Exhaustion crashed in its place, and before she could stop herself, she sent Marcus a brief message, not asking for help, just telling him what had happened. It felt important that someone else knew. Marcus arrived an hour later, not to intervene, but to sit beside her while Evan slept under hospital lights. He brought coffee, a blanket, nothing that required gratitude. They did not talk much. They didn't need to. In that sterile room, stripped of context and pretense, something shifted. Clara realized she did not feel small around him. Marcus realized he did not feel like a savior. They were simply two people keeping watch over someone they cared about. After that night, the boundaries between them softened. They still moved carefully, but there was less fear in it. Clara allowed herself to imagine a future where partnership did not mean dependence, where love did not erase selfhood. Marcus allowed himself to want something that could not be controlled or optimized. They talked openly about their concerns, their histories, the ways power and poverty had shaped them in opposite directions. These conversations were not romantic in the cinematic sense, but they were intimate in a way that mattered more. Years unfolded not as a montage, but as a series of deliberate choices. Clara advanced at work, eventually leading a small team, her confidence earned rather than gifted. She moved into a home that felt permanent, a place Evan could grow into instead of out of. Marcus continued his work, expanding his quiet philanthropy, mentoring founders who remembered where they came from. Their lives intertwined gradually, naturally, until the question was no longer whether they were building something together, but how. When Marcus finally asked Clara to move in with him, it was not framed as an upgrade or an escape. He proposed a shared space chosen together, one that reflected both of them. Clara said yes after long consideration, not because she needed the security, but because she wanted the partnership. They navigated public scrutiny with care, refusing interviews, refusing to let their story become spectacle. Evan adjusted with the ease of a child raised on honesty, understanding love not as excess, but as consistency. Clara never forgot where she came from. She volunteered, mentored, and spoke openly about the realities of single motherhood without romanticizing struggle. She taught Evan that dignity was not tied to wealth, that mistakes could be doorways, and that asking for help was sometimes the bravest thing a person could do. Marcus stood beside her, not in front, not behind, learning that the greatest legacy he could build was not measured in numbers, but in lives stabilized quietly without fanfare. On the anniversary of that midnight knock, they sat together watching fireworks from a distance. Clara held Evan, now older, his laughter ringing out at each burst of color. She thought about the woman she had been, standing alone in a dim apartment with an empty formula tin and a shaking hand. She honored her, forgave her, and thanked her for surviving long enough to make one small mistake that changed everything. Marcus watched them, feeling a gratitude deeper than pride. He understood now that wealth had given him access, but compassion had given him meaning. The message that had arrived on his phone years earlier had not been an interruption. It had been an invitation to remember, to act, to connect. If this story has moved you, if it has reminded you that lives can pivot on moments of vulnerability and choice, please take a second to like this video, share it, and subscribe. Your engagement helps these stories travel farther than we ever could alone. And before the final moment fades, leave a comment below sharing a time when kindness, given or received, changed your path. Someone reading may need that reminder tonight, because sometimes the future doesn't arrive with certainty or applause. Sometimes it knocks softly at midnight, carrying nothing but need, and waits to see if anyone is willing to open the door.